Hello, and welcome to our latest webinar. My job is important to me, working after cancer or stroke. This is going to be an incredibly valuable session, and I'm very grateful for everyone who's helped put it together. Now, as usual, a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this webinar, so if you have any problems or you want to share it with a colleague, not only will it be available on our website, but also you'll be sent a link in an email afterwards. We hope to have some Q&A at the end, so please pop any questions you have in the questions and answer box. And also we do have a poll running, which I'd be very grateful if you could complete, and I will share with you the results later on. Within my career in occupational health, I have been involved with many people returning to work, and I would say it has been a fantastic experience, but sometimes a less than fantastic experience. And I'm hoping that what we listen to today will help us all actually improve the experience for everyone. So really, without further ado, I'd like to invite the panelists to bring themselves on screen and introduce themselves. Lovely. Okay, Matt, would you like to quickly introduce yourself? We'll be coming back to you later.
Yes, indeed. Hello, everybody. So my name's Matt Eamer. I'm the creative director of an agency called me&you. And as you'll hear later, I'll share my personal story with cancer and how I worked through that experience and continue to work. So really looking forward to sharing my lived experience and hopefully some useful tips and advice for you all during that journey. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Josh, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I'm a people development business partner at the Stroke Association, responsible for all of the stroke specific and communication support type training we offer our staff and volunteers. I'm a speech and language therapist by background. That's what got me into stroke, and I've been with the Stroke Association 12 years.
Thank you, Josh. And Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick Hounsfield. I'm founder of The Wave. I'm a stroke survivor, and yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. Actually, I think we're going to start talking to you, Nick, and I've just got a few questions for you, really. When did you have your stroke, and would you say that you're in good health before that? Were there any physical or mental warning signs did you have?
Yeah, so I had my stroke in 2020, just at the same time as the pandemic hit. I actually had it on playing hockey. So I was in the middle of a game. I was actually just about 5 minutes into the game when the stroke happened. And I would say I was, physically incredibly well. I was still running around. I was surfing loads. I was playing hockey loads. But I guess from a mental perspective, I was under a lot of stress at that time, mainly from work. And I guess it was towards the end of what had been a probably tricky 10 years of trying to get a business off the ground for the first time. So I think, through the whole process of trying to find out more around my stroke and what happened, the only way we ended up being able to sort of justify it was around some kind of mental health issue that, literally caused my brain to just create a stroke.
I mean, that is amazing, isn't it? Because we think of what I certainly do. I think a lot of people do think of stroke as a very physical thing, and the fact that you were feeling physically well, I think, would be quite a surprise to a lot of people. So, could you tell us a little bit about how your strokes affected your speech? I know when we were talking before that you said they did, and how long it took to gradually overcome some of these challenges that you must have faced.
Yeah, so I when I had a stroke, the main reason why I realized that I was having a stroke was because of my complete lack of being able to talk at all. So I was trying to tell people that I was feeling really very strange. I ran to the dugout on the hockey pitch, and people were asking me, what's happened? Why have you got off the pitch? And all I can say is that I felt like I needed to be in a really safe place, being exposed on a hockey pitch, with everyone looking. I felt like I needed to be held in some way, physically and mentally. And everybody then said, "How, what's going on? What's going on? Why have you run off the pitch? Run off the pitch?" And then I wanted to say something, and I realized it's super weird, but I knew what I wanted to say, but it wouldn't come out of my mouth. And all I could say was um it was so strange. And then so I lost all speech apart from being able to say and I think a couple of times in hospital I was able to say no, when they thought that I was having a nervous breakdown. And I knew that I had something much more severe than that, but they were thinking that I had this sort of functional problem, which is basically you can get it from almost like a nervous breakdown where your body just shuts down. Um, and that quite often can be the differential diagnosis of a stroke before you've had the particular investigations, like CT scan and MRI scan and everything. It took me probably 2 or 3 weeks before I could start to string a couple of sentences together. And then I would say that it took at least 6 months before I could speak, more fluidly. But behind that is the ability or lack of ability to be able to process quickly enough. So even now, as I speak to you, 4 years later, it feels like it's English is a second language to me, where it feels like if I was an amazing person at speaking French, but it's not my primary language. It feels like that the whole time. I'm having to intentionally think about what I'm wanting to say. It's just a split second, but it's enough for me to feel it, but probably not so much for everyone around me to know it. But yeah, it's still 4 years later, probably as good as I am. It might still slowly improve beyond this, but it'll be slow from now on.
Yeah. I mean, did you find, I mean, how did you communicate to begin with? When you found that you're probably what most of us find our main source of communication, how did you initially get over that to be able to communicate what you were feeling?
It was tricky. I would say it felt like a bit like, not that I can remember, but it feels like I've got three kids, but it feels like the frustration that kids have when they can't get across what they think and what they feel, and they're wanting to verbalize it, but they don't have the vocabulary to be able to do it. And what happens, I mean, the terrible twos, so to speak, with young kids is around the frustration of not being able to tell people exactly what you want and what you need and what you like and what you feel. And that's why people get really frustrated, or kids get really frustrated, and can't control their temper. And that's something that I definitely felt like, my background's in healthcare. I used to treat lots and lots of young kids. And you can see that I was returning back to that window in time of frustration, not being able to verbalize, tell people how I felt, what I thought. And I found it particularly triggering around the family, because my family was so desperate for me to be able to talk again that they started to finish off all my sentences for me. And oh my God, that was it's so frustrating. And it came from a position of love to try and help me, but actually it's the worst thing to do, is to try. You need to give people that space and time to be able to say what they truly think, rather than finishing their sentences off for them.
I think note to the wise there. I think, yes, we all need reminding of that. So when did you start to return to work? And looking back, was it the right time for you and in the right way? How long did it take? And with all that knowledge you now have, would you do things differently?
Yeah, so I was desperate to get back to work. I was the founder of a company that was, had only just opened. immediately put everybody onto furlough, was in survival mode, and the stroke hit at the same time. And so it was a real, yeah, it was a real perfect storm of a moment for me, really, and for the business. So I wanted to get back and help and sort of steer the ship, so to speak, and make sure that it was all going to be okay, and that my staff were okay, and that we would survive the pandemic, because we'd only just opened. So many companies were saying we just need to shut down now. I didn't want that, but I needed to, in honestly, I probably came back to work probably a year earlier than I should have done. It was a strange time anyway for the world. So I wouldn't say that was any fault of anybody, not myself, not people in HR and my investors, and I had no pressure apart from myself. But that pressure, to me as a business owner, was really, really, really big, and I felt like I needed to get back really quickly. And I guess because it was still a young company, that trust hadn't, we had good trust throughout the team, but we opened up and starting something new, and we hadn't been able to really develop that trust for me to be able to take a back seat and go, oh, somebody else has got this. I need to just sort of chill out and get better myself. And then there's this sort of innate thing of wanting to prove that you can get better and improve, and almost want to go, oh well, normally you recover in 6 months. Well, I'm going to do it in 3. It's like a competition to myself, which was just stupid looking back. It's like, well, just take that time. If you do it right, you've got the whole of your life to be able to come back and deliver your value later. How valuable are you right now, is the big question.
Yeah. And I think that leads on to sort of the next question I want to ask you is, how have you addressed the rebalancing of your work and home since your strokes?
Well, I think, yeah, after having a stroke, and I would imagine it's anything, it's the same with anybody who goes through a really drastic medical problem, or I guess feels the threat of life and their own mortality, is about it putting balance back, perspective back on your life, and realizing that really what is, hopefully most people love their work, and they go to work feeling like it brings out the best in them, and they feel valued, and it feels like you're part of a mission and a purpose that you're delivering, I hope. But a lot of people don't have that, for many different reasons. But for me, it's about going, well, who's most important right now? It's my kids, it's my family, it's my wife. Making sure that I'm there for them, and work, for the first time in a long time, became second fiddle to my family. Making sure that my family were good, and friendships were so important, and making sure that my own health was important and prioritized over and above anything else, because ultimately, if you're not there to reap the rewards of seeing an amazing business grow, this amazing family grow, then what's it all about? So it's about creating that perspective, that shift between how important work was, and actually, more importantly, how you were. If you're good at home, if you've got good health, you will perform the best. Whereas quite often it gets flipped the other way around.
Yeah. And I think, as a director, as an owner of the company, how has your experience impacted on how you would manage return to work of one of your staff, if it happened to them, of employees? How would you think your perspective has changed, or what would you do differently now that perhaps you might not have done before your experience?
Yeah, I guess the beauty of not being able to talk for a lot of the time, for a while, was I did a lot of reading and listening to podcasts, and trying to work out actually, like, this sort of moment to reset your life, both personally but also as a business, and go, right, well, this is this is golden time, really, where you can just have that moment in time to go, what's this all about? And actually, how should we be as a business? And particularly, how we should be as an employer. And to me, it changed my view about how you employ people, that actually we should be thinking about, as an employer, that we've got these people coming under our care. And I think it is under our care, that we've got the gift of people coming under our care, and we could potentially really look after them, and do what's right, not just do what's good for the business and for the profitability of the business, but actually how important balancing profits and making sure that we're doing the right thing for the business, people, making sure that we're doing right by the people who work under our care, and obviously customers and all the rest of it. And finally, the planet. And actually, when you get that balance right as a business, then actually you can really flourish, and you can see how you are a sustainable business for the future. But ultimately, I still think that people should be right at the heart of that, and understanding that you should be caring for them in the same way that you would care for any other human that you come across. So being probably much more generous in terms of how you deal with the people that you work with, making sure that you're generous with their time, making sure that they understand that there's no pressure for them to get back to work too quickly, particularly if it really impacts their health and well-being in the long term. So I guess it's about caring more, and it's being more generous, particularly when somebody's gone through something that is quite life-threatening.
Yeah. Brilliant, Nick, that's fantastic. I'm sure, in fact, I can see various things in the chat. I'm sure we'll be back with some questions for you. So if you want to just take a few minutes while we talk to the others, and we'll speak to you in a minute. So I'm now going to hand over to Josh, who obviously, as he said earlier, works with people recovering from stroke, and with the Stroke Association. So Josh, I'm going to hand over to you. I shall go off screen for a moment, because I know you've got some slides to share with people. Over to you, Josh.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And Nick, thank you so much for sharing your story. Just so fascinating, and some really powerful messages in there, and a lot of parallels with what a lot of stroke survivors tell us at the Stroke Association. So don't expect me to follow that, guys, but what I can share with you is 10 golden rules for supporting someone affected by stroke back into the workplace. So delighted to have this opportunity, and it's pleasing to see so many of you on the call. Next slide, please. Oh, there we have it. No, you can go back one. That's perfect. Excellent. So yes, you can find a more full explanation of the 10 golden rules in our complete guide to stroke for employers, which can be found on our website, folks. It is worth saying from the outside that a stroke can turn a person's world upside down. In an instant, their life might have changed forever. And in addition to potentially having to contend with changes in how their body works, their ability to communicate, how perhaps they might be thinking and feeling, they'll probably have some very valid concerns about when and how they might return to work. And of course, this will often come with some financial concerns too. There's certainly no magic wand in this situation, and for some people, they may not be able to return to their current role, or they might choose not to, and that could well be the right decision for them. But your support as an employer or a colleague can make a massive difference as they navigate this really tricky period in their post-stroke journey. So let's make a start with golden rule number 1, if you want to give us the next slide. And yeah, first up we have timing. This is something Nick alluded to, possibly not being quite right for himself. But when is the right time for that person to return to work? Will it ever feel like the right time? It's such an important one, but of course it's going to vary from person to person. No two people are the same, and no two strokes are the same. There are just so many variables at play here. There's obviously the physical, mental, emotional impact of their stroke, which can vary massively. And then, of course, There's the type of work that that person does. Stroke survivors often tell us that issues with confidence and fatigue as well can be particularly difficult to contend with when returning to work as well. Now, it's normal for people to want to get back to work as quickly as possible, but if people return to work before they or their employers are ready, then that can lead to problems a little bit further down the line. And on the other hand, too much of a delay can affect someone's confidence and make it more difficult when they do come back to work. So it's really, really important to just try to not seem like you're putting pressure on that person to return to work, but the best thing to do is to try and stay in touch with that employee and plan their return together. So it should be a collaborative process. And this should help you to understand what support they need and give you time to put that in place before they come back. And that should make it easier for both of you. Golden rule number 2. You can do your best to get that timing right, folks, by asking the expert, which is, of course, the stroke survivor themselves. Every stroke survivor is an expert in their own needs, so don't be afraid to ask them about the best way you can support them. And start by being open and supportive, letting them know that their needs are important to you, and try to keep those channels of communication open without putting pressure on them. It is worth noting, though, that it can take time to become aware of all of the different changes that might happen after a stroke. So, your employee, that individual, may not have all of the answers straight away, and things are likely to change as time goes on. Okay, next one. I think I've touched on this one already, but our next golden rule is around listening and really trying to take the time to understand without judgment how their stroke has affected them. So again, trying to set up those clear, open channels of communication with that employee as soon as possible, and asking questions to really make sure you understand and have all of the information you need. Now, of course, we have a wealth of information, folks, on our website about the various effects of stroke to help you understand those as well. Number 4. Our 4th golden rule is around not making assumptions. Now, as we've said already, no 2 strokes are the same, just like no 2 people are the same. Some people will have visible disabilities, such as problems with movement, let's say. But for others, those disabilities might not be so visible. And we often refer to these as hidden effects of stroke, folks. So, for example, problems with concentration and fatigue. And that one in particular, fatigue, is such a massive one. Around 50% of all stroke survivors tell us that this problem with an excessive and overwhelming tiredness that seemingly doesn't seem to get better with rest or sleep ends up becoming their biggest problem after a stroke. And these hidden disabilities can, of course, make it difficult to know that someone needs support. So that's why it is so important to ask and listen, which was, of course, our last 2 golden rules. Alrighty, number 5. Yeah, do try to be sensitive, folks, to their right to privacy. Just be mindful that for lots of different reasons, they may not wish to disclose their disabilities to other colleagues, or even the fact that they've had a stroke. So ask them what they would like to let other colleagues know, and if so, who. And then you can agree between, the best way to do that. Number 6. Do find out if your organisation has any policies in place for long-term illness or absence. Familiarise yourself with those and speak to the relevant teams in your organisation, such as human resources and occupational health, which is, of course, Catherine's role, for additional guidance. And if the person is unable to return to work, ensure that the right processes and clear communication are in place to ensure a fair outcome for both them, but also your organisation. Now, I've alluded to this one already, but if I was to ask you about what your biggest fear or concern might be if you were to have had a stroke, I suspect for many of you, how you might manage financially would be right up there. Well, money worries is a huge problem for many, many stroke survivors. So check to see what financial support your employee is entitled to receive. That might include sickness pay, health insurance, and so on. And just making sure you give that information as promptly as you can and in a way that's clear, honest, and easy to understand for them as well. Number 7. Number 7's around support. Your employee may be able to get practical support via something called Access to Work. There's plenty more information about this in the guide, but for anyone who doesn't know, this is a UK government scheme that provides practical advice and support for disabled people and their employers to allow them to find or stay in work. And that might include a grant towards the cost of practical support, these reasonable adjustments that might allow that person to get back into the workplace. Your employee, the stroke survivor, might also be receiving support from an NHS occupational therapist. They're incredibly well placed to provide information, advice and support around returning to work and things that might help them to do that successfully. And in fact, many stroke survivors tell us that they often put their employer in touch with the occupational therapist so that they can then help the employer understand how that person's stroke has affected them and the sorts of support that they might benefit from when returning to work. Number 8. Our next golden rule is around creating a return to work plan, folks. So as we've talked about already, it's well worth maintaining regular communication with the person in question, and this will help you to really understand if and when they're ready to create a plan for returning to work. Now, that plan ought to feel like a collaborative process, but it ought to focus on things like perhaps changes to the tasks that they do, any additional support they might need, number of days and hours they might work when they first go back to work. And it might also include a return to work risk assessment, which will likely be necessary as part of that process too. And that just helps to ensure that, a safe and successful return to work for that individual, which doesn't cause harm to themselves or others. Most people do find a phased return, which allows them to gradually build up their previous working hours, helps them just get used to working again, helps them kind of just dip their toe in the water in terms of what's manageable, and also how best to manage fatigue on a day-to-day basis if that's a big problem for them. It's also a really good opportunity to update them as part of this planning process. On any team or organisational changes that might have happened since they were away from work as well. Our penultimate golden rule now is trial and review. Prior to and during a stroke survivor's return to work, their needs are likely to change as their recovery continues. We've heard about that journey Nick went on. So setting kind of regular times to review the arrangements you've agreed, be honest about what is or perhaps isn't working as well as you'd like, and encourage them to do the same. But do try to be flexible and creative as you kind of think through those solutions that might work in order to overcome some of those challenges that work for both parties. Those reviews needn't be formal meetings. They could perhaps just be a weekly chat over a cup of coffee. Do keep notes though, as these can help both of you really see the progress that person is making, as well as recording any problems that might need to be addressed. Right, we come to our final golden rule, and that's around flexibility. Trying to be as flexible as possible. We've talked about the importance of flexibility and creativity when trying to find solutions that work, but that flexibility is important in other ways too. So, for example, it's very likely that they will continue to have appointments with health professionals once they return to work. And it's often going to be a little bit of trial and error in terms of how they're able to manage their fatigue and other difficulties they might be encountering. So do please try to offer those individuals some flexibility around that. Certainly when it comes to appointments, rehabilitation they might need to attend, as that's a really essential part of a person's recovery. And it's also going to help potentially maximise the contribution they can make in the workplace in the long term. So there you have it. That's me, folks, and our 10 golden rules. I hope that was interesting, useful, gave you some food for thought. I'll hand you back to Catherine.
Josh, that was brilliant. Thank you. I think it's always good, some things you go, oh, that makes sense. Something, oh, I hadn't thought of it from that way. So I think just having that as a resource is really, really helpful. So thank you. Right, now we're going to come on to Matt. Matt, I believe you're going to tell us all about your journey, as it were. So I shall leave you to it.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Josh and Nick. I think hopefully what I share over the next few minutes with you all has quite a lot of parallels. Although my journey relates to cancer, actually, I think some of those golden rules just highlighted apply to anyone really returning to work, after a health challenge. So I don't have any slides. It's just me talking, and I will initially, I'm going to set the scene. I'm going to provide you with a real insight into my personal experience over the last 4 or so years. And I do that to then give some context to the recommendations and the insight that I share. I certainly don't do it for any pity or drama, but it is worth setting that scene. And a bit like we heard at the beginning there from Nick, my journey with cancer started during lockdown. It was just after my son's 2nd birthday, and I thought I had, I don't know, done a dodgy barbecue in September 2020 and had some stomach discomfort, which grew significantly. The discomfort became very uncomfortable over a very short period of time, and I was rushed to hospital. And following a sort of an overnight scan, you can tell it's serious when you see a team of people walking towards you, and one of them has a Macmillan sort of badge, and you're like, okay, this isn't looking good. And what I had a major obstruction in my large bowel, which they had to remove. They replumbed me, and then I was diagnosed. They sectioned it and said, yep, you've got bowel cancer. So at the time I was 39, and unfortunately there is an increase in young adults with cancer. And that's why I think talking about work, life and health is increasingly important, because actually people getting these life-changing challenges like I did, it's not going away. So we do need to think about how we deal with that, whether we're running a company or we're working with colleagues. So after that rather dramatic operation and a large cut through my abdomen and all these exciting things, I was had a whole 6 months of very traditional, very intensive chemotherapy, and the benefit of lockdown was that my hair and all those horrible side effects of traditional chemotherapy, no one really saw, because we were all sort of hidden away at home. And during all this, I continued to run a creative agency, which might seem strange. And we've talked earlier about assumptions, but after diagnosis, my wife and I, we didn't call this a life audit at the time, but in effect, we looked at our life. We looked at how do you spend your time, especially when, because of my diagnosis, it was looking pretty severe. It had spread. It means it was stage 4 bowel cancer, and it still is stage 4 bowel cancer, and there isn't a stage 5. So it was a pretty bad card to be dealt. And so naturally, with a challenge like that, you look at how to spend your time, and you look at your family and you look at your priorities. And for us, when we audited our life, we highlighted absolutely the priority of what is right for the kids and the family, but also I looked at my purpose. And so often we can say, okay, well, you've got this rather challenging health diagnosis, so that is all we're going to focus on. But we chose not to. I chose not to. I put a post-it note up on the fridge that said, cancer is not going to define my life. And you think about what you want your children and other people to think about, to know from you. And for me, my work still mattered to me hugely. There was that part of me, that purpose was still there. So throughout chemotherapy, I continued to work on and off. I noticed there was a pattern to my behavior, so I was able to adjust work so that the times when I could sleep, I slept. The times that when my brain was super active, pumped full of steroids, I was actually really productive. But work continued. Increasingly, the work that we do as a creative agency was purposeful work, so designed for good, because that was a big motivation already for the agency, but it became laser focused when you're hit with a diagnosis, as I was. And then, even though things have changed and they attempted to go in and fix my liver and that couldn't work, and then they put me on a second form of immunotherapy, which had only just been approved. Even through those periods of times and changes, and those drugs I still am on. I still take pills every day. I still pop over to get hooked up every fortnight, and I'm very active in the bowel cancer community, and I support Bowel Cancer UK. But all through those steps and journey, I continued to choose to work. And I think what's very interesting when we think about returning to work after is that sometimes a diagnosis never leaves you. That actually, if there are people that have a stroke diagnosis or a cancer diagnosis in their 30s and 40s, there's still a lot of life, there's a lot of purpose, and there's a lot of work that still people can choose to do. And where I, as an owner of a business, was able to reshape how and when I worked, I now think that from that insight, there's a lot that can be done when supporting colleagues. So this is why I speak at events like this. This is why I've had a few sort of business owners approach me and say, okay, I've got this person, how this has happened to them, how best to support them. And I think there are certain things that really align actually with those golden rules. And I noted a few down whilst listening to there, and I think one of them, I think, is really important, is about how easily we can all make assumptions. The team that I work with, the clients that I work with, I think when they instantly hear cancer or a serious health diagnosis, can immediately make assumptions that, oh, this person isn't going to want to work. They just need time. Now, every single person's needs and scenarios are different. So all I can speak from is my personal experience, identifying that actually when you're going through treatment, it is really helpful to have another motivation to get up in the morning. To overcome fatigue, you have to learn to listen to your body better. Part of that overcoming fatigue is about rest, but also to overcome fatigue, sometimes you need to move, you need to walk, you need to be active. And I think that's the same with your brain. You don't want to completely focus your time and your effort, your brain, just on the health diagnosis. You want other motivations. You need other motivations, but you, the individual, the person that has that diagnosis, has to be given the space and the choice. And I think that's really important. For me, I knew that that cancer, the word, the impact becomes bigger if you let it. That if you say, okay, that's just going to be my focus, that's just, for me, wasn't the choice I wanted to make. And it didn't feel like the healthy choice. So never assume that a colleague, a staff member, just needs time. They actually might need purpose. They might want to work. They might want to have a reason to get up, to be shown that they are needed and that they can make a difference for the business that they love working for. I think it does need, I think, as Nick mentioned earlier, for the job that they do, the job that you do, to be meaningful. I think that that's a caveat to all of this, is they've got to love the job. And part of that then is about the culture, the meaning that we express through the job that we have. But I think that's a real key thing, and accept that you don't know everything, you won't know everything, but there's a lot of help out there for whatever diagnosis in place. There's a lot of help out there. And I think we naturally try to fix the person, but I think from an organizational point of view, we can look at the culture and what we've got set up with. So in a simple way, it's rather than fixing the person, it's putting the ramp, the facility, the time, the flexibility in place to support them, to give them time and to listen. But I think that's the key things that I wanted to highlight, that even when you're given a major diagnosis, it certainly changes your perspective. And I think there's a book that I read called Anti-Cancer, which describes at the beginning how when you're told you've got this, you leave the train track of normal life and you never ever go back. For me, thankfully, that train track is going on for a long, long time, and it's probably a little bit closer to normal life. But there is a lot of perspective that something like this happens, and it makes you look at the way in which you support your team, the way in which you support your colleagues, and providing space for them to talk openly and to share. So I think that's the core of what I wanted to share, and I think it then links in quite nicely into some of the questions, Catherine, that you might have for myself and a few other panelists.
Brilliant, Matt. That was fantastic. And as you say, I think there is a lot of questions, a lot of things that people want to comment on. So thank you very much. Tom, do we have the answers to the poll? Oh, we may do. Oh, there we go. So thank you for those who answered the poll. And we asked about, have you had to return to work following a period due to ill health? 30% of you have said yes. 33 have said no, but a friend or a relative has. And only 37% say no. So I think this is a significant issue for all of us, and to ensure that everybody gets the best out of this. So thank you if you answered the poll. That's been very helpful. So, right, I've got a few questions that I want to ask both Matt and Nick. And the first one, as you can see on screen, is, I'll start with you, Matt. What was the best and worst thing a colleague or client said to you when you returned to work?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. I think it was actually the unsaid. It was the where that a colleague wants to raise this, that what they're thinking about, but I first had to create a space in which, for me, actually, I invited people on a one-to-one, and I spoke to them face to face about it, because we're a relatively small team. And I think without doing that, there's a lot of questions that people had that they didn't feel comfortable approaching me about. And similarly, I had a client who had only just started working with us when I went off on my emergency operation, and the team picked things up. And it wasn't until later that he said, Matt, I don't really know you, but I tell you what, I must be honest now, that when I heard about what was going on with you, I was just worried about my project. I just wanted it done. You've been actually great, but I didn't know that would be the case. And it was that honesty of, actually, that person just wanted his project delivered. And I laugh about that now, but that's also fine, right? Because you're running, or you're working for an organization, and you want that honesty to say, often when someone maybe hears about this person has this happen to them, the instinct is, well, how's that going to impact me? And whether that's whether they work for my organization, what does that mean for me? Or whether that's a customer. In all cases, it was creating a space where people could speak to me, and demonstrating that we could still deliver as well.
Thanks, Matt. Nick, have you got any things that came to mind about this question?
Yeah, I think probably it's probably mentioned it earlier about people finishing off my sentences and not allowing me to have my own voice, which is so ironic when you have lost your voice and then people kind of fill in the gaps for you. That was definitely one of the worst things, one of the frustrating things that happened. But I guess the best thing really is understanding. So, like Josh said, there's a real issue, particularly with stroke survivors, around tiredness. It's incredibly tiring being able to get through even half a day, let alone a full day. And I'm probably never had a sort of afternoon nap in my life, but I found that it was just critical for me to be able to get through the whole day. And sometimes we'd go to bed for an afternoon nap for 20 minutes and still be there 5 hours later. And I think, that's something that I was really lucky that obviously I'm kind of the boss, but equally being able for people to understand the fact that maybe I'm not picking up the phone at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because actually I'm still recovering at that time, and it might not necessarily be the perfect time for everybody else to fit in with their working days. But actually understanding that the morning I was bright and sparkly, and then by the afternoon I was pretty much dead to the world, and you might just get one email and one answer from me, was really important. So yeah, sort of pros and cons, but ultimately it's around education. And like Josh said, and even I work with the Stroke Association as part of my recovery, brilliantly, but actually the stuff that Josh just shared today is like, oh, I wish I would have been able to forward that to my colleagues and to our head of HR people, just to make sure people really understood, because there's this sort of weird situation where as soon as I was back at work, I was deemed to be, you should be firing on all cylinders. And particularly when physically you might be looking fairly well. And in my job, you're outside and in the water and surfing and all the rest of it. You look the epitome of health, but actually, underneath that, like your ability for your brain to understand and process stuff and your ability to speak could still be very, very much in the rehab phase. So, education, like sharing as much as possible. And obviously, Stroke Association got some great resources to be able to share, which I didn't have access to back then, and I definitely will be sharing that in the future.
Brilliant, Nick. I mean, that brings us on very nicely to the next question. Did you have any technology, any sort of stuff, as I would say, that helped your return to work, or was it more the understanding and the routine for you?
I didn't have any technology as such. I think the gift of time, and I think Josh covered it really well earlier. It's people being patient to me was the most important thing. The gift of time is so important when everybody else is firing off all cylinders, and it's super weird as a stroke survivor, where actually cognitively you can process stuff in your mind just as fast as everybody else, but it's just taking a whole load of time to process, to get back out of your mouth. So this weird thing where you've got still a really good sparky brain there, and on top of that you've now got this sort of supercharged empathy that you've realized is so important, but it just takes time to get it out of your mouth. So I'm sure obviously there's depending on what you need to overcome, there's technologies and equipment and all the sorts of it, all sorts of stuff out there. But for me, it was just the gift of time. It's so important.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. Matt, same question for you, and the adjustments that you found helpful.
Yes, I mean, for me, it did depend what I was on, what drugs and chemotherapy. You actually establish quite a routine. because it affects you in a relatively regular way when you're on a 2-week cycle or 4-week cycle. Because I was the founder, I was able to adapt when I had meetings, have a little sofa bed off camera. Also, one thing that was really helpful is having virtual meetings where I had a note taker come along, and AI note taker that actually just recorded and summarized things, because a lot of what I do is facilitating conversations, the why, the what, how questions, and making sure that was accurately recorded, because I wasn't always trusting my recollection. I've also got residual neuropathy in my feet, so although I am standing right now, after this I'll sit down. I've got a roller to keep my feet, try to wake them up, because I've got nerve damage and things like that. So it was putting those a few physical things, but also having that flexibility of, okay, right, that time I'm productive at. Afternoons I need to take a rest and then get back on things. And I think easier to some extent for me to put that in because I own the business, and that is, that does make me think about actually how would I make sure that if someone had something happen to them, that I make sure that they're able to say, actually, this time I'm more productive, this time I'm not. Yeah.
Thank you very much. No, that's really helpful. Let's have the other question here. Let's start with you, Matt, this time. Do you think it's harder or easier to transition back to work if you're the owner of a business?
I think easier. I probably, in hindsight, made some silly choices of I was doing stuff when I was stuck in hospital and choosing to work at times, but it gave me purpose, and I wanted to do those things. My brain was working even while I was recovering from operations and things like that. And the points of restructuring the day and adjusting availability, there's more of a freedom for me than maybe someone else, that sort of, I need permission for taking this time off, and so that made it easier, I think, as the owner, rather than working for a company.
Brilliant, thanks. Nick, your view on that one?
Yeah, it must be easier. Must be easier. I'd imagine, and to me, it will be around, if somebody isn't the owner of a business and is, has been unfortunate with these medical issues, then I think, as tricky as it is, it's around sort of challenging. To me, challenging, making sure that there's an educational piece. So if somebody doesn't understand the impact that your health has had on your ability to work and be able to bring the best person of yourself, best person to work, there has to be some educational piece there where you have to, I don't know how, depends on the size of the company and all the rest of it, but have, a proper word with your head of HR and people and saying, look, this, I don't think that I'm being treated fairly coming back to work, and being able to lean on resources like the Stroke Association, or there will be similar associations out there to help a whole wealth of healthcare issues, to see if you can educate people. If you can try and go, well, it'll help me get a better result at work, but equally, it might help the next person who's going to come along and potentially going to have healthcare issues that needs to be resourced and helped. So it's again a real education piece, really, and doing these kind of webinars and stuff is so important, and the ability to spread the word. I'd hope, there's a few questions that have popped up already where people maybe haven't got the support that they've got. It may well be that there's some resources here, or even this webinar, that could be shared to go, actually, can you help me a bit more, because I think that I'm feeling either lonely or unsupported in the environment that I found myself in.
Brilliant, thank you. Do naturally one would have thought, it should be easier if you're part of a company with the resources and other people around. And I think we should strive for a future where that is the case. But I think as you two have well articulated, that's actually probably not the case at the moment. That a lot of people, don't have the choice, aren't able to have the conversations that you as owners were able to have. So it would be nice that we reach a point at which it's easier to be an employee, but I don't think we're quite there yet at the moment, are we?
Yeah, and we shouldn't have a business owner to have a stroke or cancer to make a change in the world. It's like this should be part of general policy, that this is the gold standard, and we will always try for gold standard to support an employee who has come up against healthcare issues.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I'm looking at the questions that have come in, and everybody can see them. And some of them are quite complicated, but I think there's a bit of a thread running through some of the questions. Is what support is available? We've got a lot of questions about people not feeling that they're able to access support, don't know where to go. Matt, or actually, I'll start with Matt. Any words of advice for people looking for where to go to gain support?
Well, it depends if it's support from a point of view of I want to help a colleague, or I'm in HR supporting a staff member, or whether it's an individual themselves. And I think the scenario is always different depending on the particular challenge or diagnosis they've got. So for me, because I ended up, with bowel cancer, I went to Bowel Cancer UK. I joined, and I'm a moderator of one of their forums, and that provided me with medical support, and yet actually some of the other support I needed. So I needed last year actually, I had counselling because things went on for a long period of time, and actually my motivation dipped, so I needed to help with that. It was discovering that there's so many points for support, but actually knowing where to look. Actually having, for me, it was the local Macmillan Cancer Centre, and having time speaking to them. I think for sort of HR departments and supporting colleagues, that's probably an area that I would tend to look for, like some of the advice highlighted by the Stroke Association, I think, on those golden rules. The only other thing I'd probably add on support is making sure that, in hindsight, as a business owner, there are certain things that I wish were better in my business, and now are, like a healthcare plan, like key person insurance, and not just putting those in place, but actually as part of our quarterly review, again, reminding all of the staff members of these. Just having the benefits isn't good enough. Explaining and showing, you can go and speak to someone, please do this. Repeating that again and again and again is far better than just, you've got all these perks, all these healthcare benefits, go and use them. You've got to demonstrate, you've got to show that these are there and accessible, and encourage that again and again and again, because even with the best healthcare package and wellness package in the world, if people aren't accessing that, they're not benefiting from those.
Helpful. Nick, any pointers? There are a few people who are talking around stroke within the questions. Some of them obviously don't seem to have had the support and are asking for where they should be looking for support. Any help there?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to Josh's golden rules, they're great rules, and actually they probably apply across pretty much most illnesses that people would encounter. So again, I think it's having a clear set of, this is best practice. Ideally, this is how I would, if I was a business owner, this is how I would want to treat my employees. And sometimes it's, in the absence of clear guidance or clear direction, sometimes holding that mirror up to head of HR or business owners, say, look, I'm suffering with the symptoms of whatever it might be. These are guidelines that are very, very clearly defined, works across a lot of illnesses, And I think that this is something that would be really useful for you to take on board. It takes guts for some people, particularly if you're feeling unwell, to be able to fight your corner on what you need. But ultimately, I'll say I'd always go, look, just deliver. If you were the business owner, think of it as if you were the business owner, what would you like to be seeing out there to support you? And without a doubt, Stroke Association and probably many other organizations that help deliver some of the changes that you need to see in HR policy. Hopefully there's resources out there that can help.
Fantastic. Josh, did you want to just signpost people to any of the resources, or is it best to go just to the Stroke Association website?
Yeah, I mean, if you do go to the website, it should be fairly easy to navigate to those work-related resources. I've mentioned about the complete guide, but if you just type work into our search box of the website, that should come up quite easily. And we obviously haven't had a chance to broach all of the questions that have popped up in the chat panel and the other comments, but I just wanted to make reference to the fact that we've heard some really poor stuff that's gone on in terms of people's experiences and employers not being supportive at all. And I just want to say, I'm just so sorry to hear that, really, what people have had to go through, not just a stroke, but then a really troublesome and unhelpful experience from employers. So just sorry to hear that, really.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I mean, we will be sending an email out afterwards. We will be putting links in there, which will hopefully help people signpost. Unfortunately, we're not going to have a chance really the time to sort of go through other things. So if you give me, I'm just going to make a few summary notes. I get this is the great opportunity about being the sort of the sort of holding it all together type person, because what I've taken away from today, and I say this takes me back to my roots, is the person is the expert. Okay, and that leads on to my next point is conversations, discussion and choice with the person about how they're feeling. Let them guide seems to be an overriding thing. Getting the support, and certainly the questions have concerned me, just like you said, Josh, that some people have not had positive experiences. I think the Stroke Association, the cancer charities, there is a lot of support out there, and I certainly would recommend people engage with them to get that support. There are companies, I mean, we do workplace needs assessments. There are other companies who do that too. So there is support for employers outside the NHS resources, so again, make sure that that's investigated as well. And I suppose one thing I really want to sort of end up on is, good work is good for people, but good has to be involvement of the people involved to decide the right time, the right choices. So, I really am passionate about that, but it's got to be the right time, the right environment too. So just before we sign off, I think it's unusual for me not to have the last word, but I just want to give all three of you, I'll start with Josh, just, is there anything I've missed? Is there anything key that you really want to finish up this webinar on, or are you comfortable we've got the key points across for people?
Yeah, certainly comfortable. I think it's been a fascinating hour. I've really enjoyed both Nick and Matt's talks that were really powerful, fascinating, and hopefully have given a lot of people on the call food for thought. So just really appreciate it. Sorry we haven't been able to answer some of those more specific questions that have popped up in the Q&A, but do reach out to the Stroke Association for further support those individuals. Thank you.
Brilliant. Nick, anything you want to sort of finish off on?
Just think, fundamentally, look, we're just all humans on Earth. We have to work, we have to play, we have to live with everyone else, and it's just about caring, isn't it? Like, all of this comes back down to caring. Like, if we care about each other in the workplace, care about each other around our homes, care about ourselves, care about people in society, then people will also reflect that careness back onto you. And ultimately, we're talking about situations where somebody needs more care, needs a bit more care than normal. and just having that emotional intelligence to be able to see that, respect that, and act on that is so important.
Thank you. And Matt.
Yeah. Oh, I can't beat that, Nick. No. That's that's exactly it. I mean, ultimately, whether you've got someone in your team that is going through something like this or not, we want to have every business, every organization should aim and aspire to have a culture where people are listened to, where you're open and honest, and so show the way. Make sure that you're actually listening to others, that you're showing that you care, and that we're not rushing to fix or make assumptions about what anyone else is thinking and what anyone else needs. I think those things are key.
Brilliant. Thank you, all three of you. It has been a really inspiring hour, so thank you so much. I'm hoping that our next webinar in mid-July might also be as inspiring, but that's quite a high bar, so I won't put too much pressure on myself. So again, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope to see you on the next webinar. Goodbye now.